The morning had started like any other in Portland, Oregon. Rain tapped against the windows of the modest two-story house on Willow Creek Drive, where Sarah Mitchell lived with her 8-year-old daughter Emma and their 3-year-old border collie Scout. The dog had been a gift from Sarah's late husband David, who had died 2 years earlier in a construction accident. David had chosen Scout specifically for Emma, believing the intelligent breed would be the perfect companion for their shy, anxious daughter who struggled to connect with other children at school. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, preparing Emma's lunch for school, while Scout sat attentively nearby, his black and white coat still slightly damp from the morning walk. His alert brown eyes followed Sarah's every movement, a habit that had become both comforting and unnerving since David's death. Sometimes Sarah wondered if the dog was watching over them, fulfilling some unspoken promise to his former master. Before we continue with Sarah and Scout's story, I want to ask you to do something for me. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more like it, please hit that subscribe button below. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. It helps me connect with all of you who love these powerful stories about the incredible bonds between people and their dogs. Now let's get back to what happened that morning in Portland. "Come on, Emma," Sarah called up the stairs. "Bus will be here in 10 minutes. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail. Scout immediately trotted to the bottom of the stairs, tail wagging, waiting for his favorite person to descend. The bond between the girl and the dog had grown profound over the past 2 years. Scout slept beside Emma's bed every night, walked her to the bus stop every morning, and seemed to sense her moods with uncanny precision. As Emma reached the bottom step, she knelt to hug Scout, burying her face in his soft fur. "I'll see you after school, buddy," she whispered. The dog licked her cheek, then followed her to the front door, performing his daily ritual of watching through the window as Emma walked down the driveway to wait for the bus. Sarah watched her daughter disappear down the street, then turned to face the day ahead. She worked from home as a medical transcriptionist, a job that had become essential after David's death. The life insurance had helped, but it wasn't enough to sustain them long term. She needed the steady income, and working from home meant she could be there when Emma got off the bus each afternoon. Scout returned to the kitchen, settling into his bed in the corner while Sarah poured her second cup of coffee. The house felt too quiet without Emma's presence, and Sarah found herself talking to the dog more and more. "Just you and me today, Scout," she said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. The dog's tail thumped against the floor, his eyes never leaving her face. By 9 o'clock, Sarah was settled at her desk in the converted spare bedroom, headphones on, transcribing a complex surgical report. Scout had followed her upstairs and now lay beside her chair, his chin resting on his paws. The rain had intensified, drumming steadily against the window, creating a cocoon of sound that made concentration easier. Sarah had been working for nearly an hour when she felt the first odd sensation. A slight tingling in her left arm, barely noticeable at first. She flexed her fingers, assuming she'd been sitting in one position too long. But the tingling didn't fade. Instead, it intensified, creeping up her arm toward her shoulder. She paused the recording and sat back in her chair, rubbing her arm. That's when she noticed Scout had lifted his head and was staring at her with an intensity she'd never seen before. His ears were forward, his body rigid with attention. "What is it, boy?" she asked, trying to sound casual despite the growing unease in her chest. The dog stood up, moved closer, and placed his nose against her left arm. He sniffed intently, then looked up at her face, whined once, and backed away slightly. His behavior was completely out of character. Scout was a calm, well-trained dog who never whined or showed anxiety without cause. Sarah tried to return to work, but the tingling had spread to her chest now, and she felt a strange pressure building behind her sternum. She told herself it was stress, anxiety, the lingering grief that sometimes manifested physically. She'd had panic attacks before, especially in the months immediately after David's death. But Scout wouldn't settle. He kept circling her chair, whining softly, occasionally pawing at her leg. When she tried to push him away gently, he became more insistent, grabbing the sleeve of her sweater with his teeth and tugging. "Scout, stop," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "I'm trying to work." The dog released her sleeve, but immediately pressed his body against her legs, then moved to block her path to the desk. His eyes were fixed on her face, and he barked once, sharply, something he rarely did inside the house. The pressure in her chest intensified suddenly, and Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She stood up, thinking maybe she needed water, needed to move around. But as soon as she was on her feet, the room tilted sickeningly, and she grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Scout was beside her instantly, pressing against her right side as if trying to support her weight. The dog's behavior finally broke through her denial. Something was seriously wrong. This wasn't a panic attack. The pain in her chest was real, sharp, radiating down her left arm and up into her jaw. Heart attack. The words formed in her mind with terrifying clarity. She was 34 years old, relatively healthy, but her father had died of a heart attack at 42. The genetic predisposition had always been there, lurking in the background of her medical history. Sarah managed to reach her phone on the desk, her fingers trembling as she tried to dial 911. But another wave of pain crashed through her, and the phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. She dropped to her knees, gasping, and Scout was there, his warm body pressed against hers, his nose nudging her face. The dog barked again, louder this time, then ran to the bedroom door and back to Sarah, repeating the action 3 times. She understood what he was trying to tell her. Move. Get help. Don't stay here. Using the desk for support, Sarah pulled herself upright and stumbled toward the stairs, Scout staying so close to her right side that she could feel his shoulder against her hip with each step. The stairs seemed impossibly steep, and she knew if she fell, she might not get back up. Scout went down 2 steps ahead of her, then turned back, as if showing her the way. When she hesitated, overwhelmed by pain and dizziness, he climbed back up and pressed his head under her right hand, offering physical support. Together, one agonizing step at a time, they made it down to the 1st floor. The living room phone was closer than the kitchen. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, reaching for the cordless handset on the side table. Her vision was blurring now, dark spots dancing at the edges. She managed to dial 911, and when the operator answered, her voice came out in a weak rasp. "Help," she managed. "I think I'm having a heart attack. I'm alone. My daughter's at school." The operator's voice was calm, professional. "What's your address, ma'am?" Sarah gave it, each word an effort. The operator kept talking, telling her an ambulance was on the way, asking her questions about her symptoms. Sarah answered as best she could, but she was fading fast. The phone slipped from her hand as another wave of pain consumed her, and she slumped sideways on the couch. Through the haze of pain, she was aware of Scout's frantic barking. The dog ran to the front door, barked, ran back to her, barked again. He repeated this pattern over and over, and Sarah realized he was trying to guide the paramedics, trying to make noise so they'd know exactly where to come. She could hear the operator's tinny voice still coming from the phone on the floor. "Mom, are you still there? Mom?" Sarah couldn't respond. The darkness was pulling her under, and she felt a profound sense of sorrow. Emma would come home to an empty house. Emma would lose another parent. The thought was unbearable, worse than the physical pain tearing through her chest. Scout's cold nose pressed against her face, and she felt his tongue on her cheek. He whined, a high, desperate sound that cut through her fading consciousness. She tried to move her hand to touch him, to let him know she understood, but her body wouldn't obey. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting in strange ways. Sarah heard the sirens, distant at first, then growing closer. Scout's barking intensified, and she heard him at the front door, scratching frantically. The house had a security system, and the front door was locked. The paramedics wouldn't be able to get in. The realization cut through her stupor. She had to unlock the door. Had to. For Emma. Sarah didn't know where the strength came from, but she managed to roll off the couch onto her hands and knees. Scout was beside her immediately, and she used his solid body to pull herself forward, crawling toward the front door. Each movement sent shockwaves of agony through her chest, but she kept moving, kept fighting. The sirens were right outside now. Through the narrow window beside the door, she could see the flashing red and blue lights. Scout barked continuously, jumping up at the door, then running back to her, trying to help, trying to fix this terrible thing happening to his person. Sarah reached the door and grabbed the handle, pulling herself upright. Her vision was tunneling, everything going dark except for a small circle of light directly in front of her. She turned the deadbolt with the last of her strength, and as the lock clicked open, she collapsed onto the hardwood floor. The door burst open seconds later, and paramedics flooded into the house. Sarah was aware of movement, voices, hands on her body. Scout was barking frantically until someone, a woman's voice, spoke to him firmly but kindly. "Good dog. You're such a good dog. Let us help her, okay? We've got her now." The last thing Sarah remembered before losing consciousness completely was Scout's face close to hers, his brown eyes filled with an intelligence and concern that seemed almost human. She tried to say his name, to thank him, but the darkness swallowed her whole. When Sarah woke, she was in a hospital room. The first thing she saw was white ceiling tiles, harsh fluorescent lighting. The second thing she felt was the ache in her chest and the various tubes and wires connected to her body. The third thing she heard was a familiar whine, and she turned her head to see Scout sitting beside her bed, his head resting on the mattress near her hand. A nurse appeared in her field of vision. "Welcome back, Mrs. Mitchell. You gave us quite a scare." Sarah's throat was dry, her voice barely a whisper. "My dog." The nurse smiled. "The therapy dog coordinator made a special exception. The paramedics told us what happened. He saved your life, you know. If you hadn't gotten to that phone, if you hadn't made it to the door." The doctor said every minute mattered. Sarah managed to move her hand just enough to touch Scout's head. The dog's tail wagged weakly, and he licked her fingers. "Emma," she croaked. "My daughter." "She's with your neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She's been calling every hour. We'll let her know you're awake." Over the next several hours, Sarah learned the full extent of what had happened. She'd suffered a massive heart attack caused by a previously undetected congenital heart defect. The same condition had likely killed her father. If she'd lost consciousness upstairs, if she'd been unable to call for help or unlock the door, she would have died. The paramedics said your dog was remarkable, and the cardiologist told her during his evening rounds. He was barking at them through the window, showing them exactly where to go. When they got inside, he stayed right next to you, but let them work. That kind of behavior suggests an awareness level we don't usually see. Sarah remembered David's words when he'd brought Scout home as a puppy. "Border Collies are the smartest dogs in the world," he'd said. "This guy is going to take care of our girls." Emma was allowed to visit that evening, Mrs. Chen bringing her directly from school. The 8-year-old's face was pale and tear-streaked, but she managed to hold herself together when she saw her mother awake and responsive. Scout immediately went to Emma, pressing against her legs, offering comfort in the way only he could. "Mommy, Scout saved you," Emma said, her small voice trembling. Mrs. Chen said Scout called the ambulance and everything. Sarah smiled weakly. "Not exactly, sweetheart, but he knew something was wrong. He made sure I got help. Emma climbed carefully onto the chair beside the bed, and Scout settled at her feet, his eyes moving between the two people he loved most. "Like Daddy sent him to protect us," Emma whispered. The words made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. Maybe he did, baby. Maybe he did. Sarah spent 5 days in the hospital undergoing tests and procedures to stabilize her heart. The doctors inserted a stent and prescribed a regimen of medications that would be part of her life from now on. They discussed lifestyle changes, warning signs to watch for, the importance of regular monitoring. But more than the medical interventions, what stayed with Sarah was the realization of how close she'd come to leaving Emma orphaned. How Scout's unusual behavior had saved not just her life, but her daughter's future. A dog who had been a gift, a companion, a living connection to David, had become something more. A guardian angel with 4 legs and a black and white coat. The day Sarah was discharged, the hospital staff made another exception, allowing Scout to be brought to the hospital entrance to greet her. When the wheelchair rolled through the automatic doors and Scout saw her, his entire body went rigid with excitement. The moment she was on her feet, he pressed against her legs, tail wagging so hard his whole back end moved with it. Emma held Scout's leash, her face brighter than it had been in days. "Can we go home now, Mummy?" "Yes, sweetheart, we can go home." The drive back to the house on Willow Creek Drive was quiet. Mrs. Chen at the wheel, Sarah in the passenger seat, Emma and Scout in the back. The rain had finally stopped, and pale winter sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the Portland streets. When they pulled into the driveway, Sarah felt a wave of emotion seeing her house again. The front door that Scout had scratched at, trying to help her reach help. The living room window where he'd barked at the paramedics. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but Sarah knew she would never see this place the same way again. Inside, Mrs. Chen had cleaned up and prepared the house for Sarah's return. There were casseroles in the refrigerator, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, and Emma's school assignments neatly organized on the counter. Sarah hugged her neighbor, thanking her through tears for everything she'd done. "You just focus on getting better," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Emma can come to my house after school any time you need to rest, and I'll be checking on you, so don't even think about overdoing it." After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah settled carefully onto the couch, and Scout immediately jumped up beside her, something he'd never been allowed to do before. But Sarah didn't have the heart to correct him. Instead, she wrapped her arm around the dog and held him close. Emma curled up on her other side, and the 3 of them sat there in the quiet house, bound together by love, loss, and the fierce will to survive. "I have to call someone tomorrow," Sarah said softly. "I want Scout to get special recognition for what he did. Dogs like him deserve to be celebrated." Emma looked up at her mother. "What kind of recognition?" "I don't know yet. But what Scout did was extraordinary. He wasn't trained to detect medical emergencies. He just knew. He understood that I was in danger, and he did everything in his power to make sure I got help." Over the following weeks, Sarah did indeed reach out to various organizations that recognized heroic animals. She contacted the local news, wrote letters to animal welfare groups, and documented every detail of what had happened that morning. The story began to gain traction, first in local Portland media, then gradually spreading wider. A reporter from the Oregonian came to interview Sarah, bringing a photographer to capture images of Scout with Sarah and Emma. The dog sat patiently through the photo session, occasionally glancing at Sarah, as if to make sure she was still okay. The article ran 2 weeks later, and Sarah's phone didn't stop ringing for days. People wanted to hear the story directly from her. Other heart attack survivors reached out to share their own experiences. Dog trainers called to ask about Scout's background and behavior. There was even interest from a university research program studying canine cognition and their ability to detect medical emergencies. But amid all the attention, what mattered most to Sarah was the quiet moment each morning when she woke up in her own bed, with Scout sleeping on the floor beside her and Emma safe down the hall. She was alive. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. Sarah made significant changes to her life. She started eating better, exercising carefully within the limits her doctor set, managing her stress more effectively. She also became an advocate for heart health awareness, particularly among young women who often dismissed cardiac symptoms as anxiety or stress. She spoke at a local community center about her experience, with Scout sitting calmly beside her on the stage. "I thought I was too young for a heart attack," she told the audience. "I thought the pain was just stress. If my dog hadn't insisted that something was wrong, if he hadn't helped me get to the phone and the door, I wouldn't be here today. Listen to your body, and if you have a dog who's acting strangely, pay attention. They know things we don't." Emma, sitting in the front row, beamed with pride. Her mother was alive, getting stronger every day, and Scout was being recognized as the hero he was. The shy, anxious girl who had struggled to connect with others at school now had an incredible story to share, and it changed how her classmates saw her. One afternoon, Emma came home from school bursting with excitement. "Mommy, my teacher wants me to do a presentation about Scout. She said I can bring him to class and tell everyone what happened." Sarah smiled, watching Scout's tail wag at the sound of his name. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Scout deserves to have his story told." The presentation was scheduled for the following week, and Emma worked diligently on preparing her talk, with Sarah's help. They made a poster showing pictures of Scout, included basic facts about border collies, and Emma practiced her speech until she could deliver it confidently. On the day of the presentation, Sarah accompanied Emma and Scout to the school. The third-grade classroom was filled with excited children who crowded around Scout the moment he walked through the door. The dog handled the attention with his characteristic calm, allowing the children to pet him while keeping a watchful eye on Emma. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, quieted the class and invited Emma to the front of the room. Sarah stood near the back, her heart swelling with emotion as she watched her daughter speak clearly and confidently about the morning Scout had saved her mother's life. "Dogs are really smart," Emma concluded, her hand resting on Scout's head. "They can tell when something is wrong, even when we don't know it ourselves. Scout didn't have any special training. He just loved my mom, and that love made him pay attention. It made him act when it mattered most. If you have a dog, pay attention to them. They might be trying to tell you something important." The classroom erupted in applause, and Emma's face lit up with a joy Sarah hadn't seen since before David's death. Scout stood up and pressed against Emma's legs, his tail wagging, as if he understood that he was being celebrated. Later that month, Scout was officially recognized by the American Humane Society with a Hero Dog Award. The ceremony took place in downtown Portland, and Scout wore a special medal around his neck. Representatives from local animal shelters attended, along with veterinarians, dog trainers, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the story of a border collie who had saved his owner's life. During her acceptance speech, Sarah struggled to maintain her composure. "My late husband chose Scout for our daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He wanted Emma to have a friend, a companion, someone who would always be there for her. David chose a border collie because he'd read they were intelligent, loyal, protective. He had no idea how right he was. Scout has been all of those things and more. He kept our family together when we were falling apart. He gave Emma comfort when she was drowning in grief. And when my life was on the line, he refused to give up until he knew I was safe. This medal belongs to my husband, too, for choosing exactly the right dog at exactly the right time." Emma stood beside her mother on the stage, holding Scout's leash, tears streaming down her face. When the audience stood to applaud, Scout looked up at his family, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting the love that had saved a life and healed a broken family. The months that followed brought a return to normalcy, though nothing would ever be quite the same. Sarah continued to work from home, but now Scout's bed was permanently installed in her office, and she took frequent breaks to stretch, move around, and check in with her canine guardian. The dog seemed to understand his role had expanded, watching her more carefully than before, occasionally pressing his nose against her arm or leg as if checking her vital signs. Emma thrived in ways Sarah had never expected. The shy, anxious girl had found her voice through Scout's story, and she became passionate about animal welfare and responsible pet ownership. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, with Sarah's help, reading to the dogs to help socialize them. "These dogs need families too," Emma explained one Saturday afternoon, as she sat in a kennel with a nervous pit bull mix, reading aloud from one of her favorite books. "They need someone to love them, like we love Scout." Sarah watched her daughter, marveling at the transformation. Grief had tried to destroy them, but love had rebuilt them stronger than before. And at the center of it all was a border collie who had simply done what came naturally. Protected his pack, watched over those he loved, and acted decisively when danger threatened. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah received a call from the university research program that had reached out months earlier. They wanted to include Scout in a long-term study on canine medical detection abilities. While Scout hadn't been formally trained, his behavior that morning suggested an innate ability to detect physiological changes in humans. Sarah agreed to participate, and over the following months, Scout underwent a series of non-invasive tests designed to measure his responses to various stimuli. The researchers were particularly interested in whether he could be trained to detect early warning signs of cardiac episodes, potentially helping other people with heart conditions. The study revealed that Scout did indeed show heightened awareness of changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and stress hormones. While the exact mechanism wasn't fully understood, the researchers theorized that Scout had detected subtle changes in Sarah's scent and behavior that morning, changes that indicated her body was in crisis. "What your dog did was remarkable," the lead researcher told Sarah. "But it's not magic. It's the result of an incredibly close bond, combined with a breed that's naturally attuned to human emotion and behavior. Border Collies were bred to work closely with shepherds, to anticipate needs, to respond to subtle cues. Scout applied those same skills to you." The research had practical applications. The team began developing training protocols that could teach other dogs to detect cardiac episodes, potentially giving early warning to people with heart conditions. Scout became something of an ambassador for the program, demonstrating his natural abilities while researchers studied his responses. But for Sarah, the scientific explanations didn't diminish the miracle of what had happened. Scout had saved her life, pure and simple. Whether through scent detection, behavioral observation, or some deeper bond that defied explanation, the dog had known she was dying and had refused to let it happen. On the 2-year anniversary of Sarah's heart attack, the family held a quiet celebration at home. Sarah made Scout a special dinner of chicken and rice, his favorite. Emma baked dog-friendly treats shaped like hearts. And after dinner, they all curled up on the couch together, Scout in his usual position between his two favorite people. "Do you think Daddy knows what Scout did?" Emma asked softly, her hand stroking the dog's soft fur. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think if there's any way for him to know, he does, and I think he's proud. Proud of Scout for being so brave and smart, proud of you for being so strong, and maybe even proud of me for not giving up, for fighting to stay here with you." Emma leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't give up, Mommy. I'm glad Scout wouldn't let you." The three of them sat in comfortable silence as the evening light faded outside the windows of their Portland home. Somewhere in the city, other families were gathering, other dogs were watching over their people, other bonds were forming that would prove unbreakable when tested. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, checking in as she did every few days. Sarah responded with a simple message and a photo of Emma and Scout cuddled together on the couch. "Everything okay here? We're good." And they were good. Not perfect, not without scars and struggles, but good. Alive. Together. Grateful for every ordinary day, every quiet evening, every morning when Sarah woke up to see another sunrise. Scout raised his head and looked at Sarah with those intelligent brown eyes, and she could have sworn the dog understood everything she was feeling. The gratitude, the love, the bone-deep knowledge that she'd been given a gift she could never fully repay. "Good boy, Scout," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Such a good boy." The dog's tail wagged once, twice, and then he settled back down, his body warm against hers, his breathing steady and calm. Just a dog, doing what dogs do best, loving completely, watching constantly, and protecting fiercely those lucky enough to be called family. Outside, the Portland rain began again, pattering gently against the windows. Inside, a mother, daughter, and dog sat safe and warm, bound together by love, loss, and the miracle of a second chance. Scout's medal hung on the wall in the living room, catching the lamplight, a reminder of the day one ordinary border collie had done something extraordinary. But to Sarah and Emma, Scout's greatest achievement wasn't the medal or the recognition. It was simply this: being exactly where he was supposed to be, exactly when he was needed most. In the end, that was all that mattered. That was everything. And as the rain fell and the evening deepened, Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. For modern medicine, for quick-thinking paramedics, for kind neighbors, and most of all, for a black and white border collie named Scout, who had refused to let death win, who had fought for his family with every bark, every nudge, every desperate moment of that terrible morning when everything had hung in the balance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new appointments with cardiologists, new adjustments to medications and lifestyle. But tonight, they were simply together, and that was more than enough. It was everything. Scout sighed contentedly, his eyes drifting closed, and Sarah felt her own heartbeat steady and strong beneath her hand. Still here, still fighting, still grateful beyond measure for the gift of another day, another hour, another moment with the people and the dog she loved most in this world. The story could have ended differently. So many stories like this one do, but not this time. This time, love and loyalty had triumphed. This time, a dog's devotion had rewritten what should have been a tragedy into something else entirely. A testament to the unbreakable bond between humans and the animals who choose to love us, protect us, and refuse to let us go without a fight. And in a modest house on Willow Creek Drive, as rain fell softly on Portland and the city settled into evening, a family slept peacefully, watched over by a border collie who asked for nothing more than their continued presence in his life. A simple request. A profound gift. A love that had, quite literally, saved everything that mattered.